My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 46 years old, living a quiet, well-earned life in Denver, Colorado. After spending over 2 decades as a financial analyst, I retired early just last year, a personal milestone I had worked tirelessly to reach. No kids, no partner, just me, my houseplant-filled condo, and a firm belief in boundaries. I thought I'd finally arrived at a phase in life where things slowed down, where peace replaced pressure, where your biggest worry is deciding which new recipe to try next, not being blindsided by betrayal. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning. I had just finished brewing my second cup of coffee when I noticed a thick envelope in the mail. It was from Buckeye Federal Savings and Loan, a bank I'd never done business with. Thinking it was junk mail or a pre-approved credit offer, I almost tossed it. But something about the weight of it made me pause. Inside were mortgage documents, legal notarized and apparently approved, for a home in Columbus, Ohio. Address 1386 Cedar Glen Drive. Loan amount $430,000. Term 30 years fixed. Monthly payment $2,683.75. Borrower Evelyn Carter. Me. I read and reread the documents. I hadn't bought a house. I hadn't even visited Ohio in over 3 years, not since the last awkward family Thanksgiving. I sat down at the kitchen table, my pulse hammering. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, maybe someone with the same name. But as I scanned further, my full social security number was listed. My birth date, my signature, sort of. The signature looked like mine, but not quite. Off just enough that if you didn't know better, you'd think I was just tired or in a rush when I signed. Except I hadn't. I tried calling the mortgage company, but I was put through to voicemail. I left a message flagged urgent and then sat back numb. I felt like I was slipping into a bad dream, the kind where you scream but nothing comes out. Identity theft, fraud. Someone had stolen my information. But who? That night, before I could call the bank again, my mother called me. "Did you get the papers?" she asked casually, as though she were referring to a birthday card. I froze. What papers? The mortgage documents. The world tilted. "Wait," I said slowly. "You know about this, Mom? What's going on?" "This mortgage is in my name. I didn't sign anything. I never agreed to this." "Well, that's what we wanted to talk about," she replied, sounding oddly rehearsed. "Your father and I think it's time we all got together for a proper conversation. Can you come over tonight? Lucas will be here too." Lucas. My younger brother. 3 years my junior, twice divorced and perpetually in crisis. Every family has one. Ours came with a track record of bad financial decisions, irresponsible spending, and just enough charm to talk our parents into covering his messes time and time again. But a $430,000 house, I'm not driving all the way to Ohio tonight, I said sharply. I need you to explain this to me now. This isn't a family dinner situation. This is identity fraud. "Oh, Evelyn," she sighed as though I were being difficult. "Don't be so dramatic. It's a family matter. We'll explain everything when you get here. 6 o'clock. She hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time. The conversation didn't feel real. My own mother had just all but admitted to committing a felony involving my name, my credit, my financial future, and then dismissed it like it was a misunderstanding over who was supposed to bring dessert. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about every time my parents had brushed off my concerns, every time they had guilt-tripped me into helping Lucas just one more time, and every time I'd told myself that being the stable sibling meant being the sacrificial one. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped seeing me as a person. They saw me as a resource, a means to an end, a safety net they could stretch until it snapped. And this time, they had gone too far. I wasn't a teenager anymore struggling to be heard. I wasn't a fresh college grad begging for approval. I was a grown woman who had built her future brick by brick, and I wasn't going to let them steal it from me. The next morning, I booked the earliest flight I could to Ohio. I wasn't going because I was ready to talk it out. I was going because I needed answers, in person. No more avoidance, no more gaslighting. I needed to look my parents in the eyes and hear them admit what they had done with no room to twist the truth. When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home that afternoon, I was hit by an unexpected wave of nausea. Not because the house had changed, it hadn't. Same pale blue siding, same overgrown shrubs, same wind chime on the porch that jingled no matter how still the air was. But I had changed, and the place no longer felt like home. Lucas's truck was already parked outside. A newer model Ford F-150 black with shiny rims, something he couldn't possibly afford on the patchy landscaping gigs he claimed to run freelance. I wondered if that had been purchased with someone else's name, too. Inside, my parents were seated like they were expecting company. My father wore a collared shirt tucked into slacks, and my mother had set out a tray of cheese and crackers, as if this were some kind of polite discussion and not a full-on financial ambush. Lucas slouched in an armchair, nursing a soda and avoiding my gaze. I didn't sit. "I'm not here to be manipulated," I said flatly, standing near the entryway. "So let's skip the small talk. Did you forge my signature on a $430,000 mortgage?" My mother clucked her tongue like I was being rude. "Evelyn, sweetie, sit down. Let's be civil. Answer the question." My father sighed heavily and leaned forward. "Yes," he said finally. "We used your information. But it's not as sinister as you're making it out to be. We needed to act quickly before the house went off market." I stared at him, stunned. "So you admit you committed fraud?" "Don't be so dramatic," my mother said, echoing her words from the phone call. "It's just paperwork. You're good with money. You'll barely notice the payments." My vision narrowed. "And you thought the solution was to steal from me?" Lucas finally looked up, his expression defensive. "I didn't ask them to do it. They offered. I didn't know they were going to use your name." "You didn't ask," I snapped. "Lucas, you've been spoon-fed by this family your entire life. You didn't have to ask. You just had to whine loud enough and they came running. But this is felony-level theft." My mother flinched. "It's not theft, Evelyn. We're family. Family helps family." I took a step closer, my voice shaking with rage. "Family asks. Family respects. Family doesn't lie, forge, and stick their daughter with a 30-year mortgage for someone else's benefit." Silence. My father cleared his throat. "Look, maybe we didn't go about it the right way. But this is just temporary. In 5 years, when Lucas's credit is better, he can refinance. You're just co-signing in a way." I laughed bitterly. "You forged my name, submitted false documents, and now you're calling that co-signing. Unbelievable." Lucas muttered, "You've always acted like you're better than everyone. Maybe this is what happens when you stop pretending you don't owe your family anything." I turned to him, seething. "I don't owe anyone anything, Lucas. I built my life while you wasted yours. You want a house, get a job. Build credit. Earn it like I did." "You don't understand what it's like to struggle," he shot back. "No," I said coldly. "But I understand what it's like to be used." I grabbed my bag and turned to leave. My mother's voice followed me. "If you walk out now, Evelyn, don't bother coming back. We'll do what we have to do." I stopped at the door. "Is that a threat?" My father stood up. "It's a promise. We're prepared to take legal action if you refuse to cooperate. You're part of this whether you like it or not." I stared at them, stunned by the audacity. Then I nodded slowly. "Fine. Do it. Sue me. Let's see how well that holds up in court when I show them forged documents and a paper trail of financial manipulation." My mother's face darkened. Lucas just scoffed and looked away. I walked out without another word. Back in the car, I sat for a moment with my hands gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream, cry, or laugh at how surreal it all was. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a mortgage. This was about decades of imbalance, of being the reliable one, the responsible one, the invisible one, and I wasn't going to be used anymore. Not by them. Not ever again. The drive back to my hotel felt longer than it should have. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, each word twisting like a knife. There had been no apology, no regret, just expectation and entitlement wrapped in the glossy packaging of family. By the time I reached my room, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to plead reason or negotiate. I was going to protect myself legally, financially, and emotionally. The next morning, I called Vanessa Grant, a former colleague from my Wall Street days, who now worked as a partner at a mid-sized law firm in Denver. She listened quietly as I laid out what had happened. "They forged your name on a mortgage," she asked, incredulous. Documents, signature financials, all of it. You need a lawyer immediately, she said, her tone shifting. Not a friendly favor, an actual litigator. I'll refer you to someone. That same afternoon, I met with Daniel Novak, a no-nonsense attorney who specialized in financial fraud and family disputes. He wore a charcoal gray suit and spoke like every sentence had a deadline. After I finished recounting the events, he tapped his pen against a legal pad and said, "You've got a textbook case of identity fraud and mortgage fraud. The good news is the law is on your side. The bad news is it's going to be messy." He wasn't exaggerating. Within days, Daniel helped me send formal letters to the mortgage company notifying them of fraudulent activity. He also drafted a cease and desist letter to my parents, warning them to stop all threats and communication unless it came through legal counsel. They responded exactly how I expected. First came the voicemail's angry, emotional, manipulative. "We raised you better than this. You're destroying your family over paperwork. This is unforgivable, Evelyn." Then came the email, short and cold, from a local Ohio attorney representing them. "Our clients assert that Evelyn Carter agreed verbally to assist with the purchase of a home for her brother, and that the use of her financial documents was done with implicit consent. If she refuses to uphold her financial obligations, they are prepared to pursue civil action." Daniel smirked when he read it. Implicit consent. That won't fly. This isn't a dinner bill. It's a $500,000 loan. Still, he advised me to brace for impact. Even if they don't have a leg to stand on, they can still file a suit. You'll have to respond, maybe even go to court. You prepared for that, I wasn't. But I said yes. Because what choice did I have? I'd spent my whole life avoiding conflict, bending, sacrificing, staying quiet to keep the peace. But this wasn't a dinner table argument. This was theft. This was betrayal. This was the moment my silence became complicity. So I fought. The weeks that followed were brutal. The mortgage company launched an internal investigation. They temporarily froze the account and put my credit under review. While that protected me from further damage, it also locked me out of basic financial functions. I couldn't refinance my condo, couldn't apply for a new credit card, couldn't move money between accounts without flags being raised. Daniel filed a formal fraud complaint with the county registrar's office, which started its own inquiry. Meanwhile, I tried to live normally, but normal no longer existed. Every ding of my phone made my stomach lurch. Every voicemail notification brought fresh dread. My parents didn't stop. Neither did Lucas. He posted on Facebook, "Some people forget where they came from the moment they get a little money. Guess I don't have a sister anymore." The comments were exactly what you'd expect. She always seemed cold. "That's disgusting. Family comes first. Some people let money ruin them." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth would come out eventually. But that didn't make the isolation feel any less suffocating. My inbox filled with messages from distant relatives, people I hadn't spoken to in years, telling me I should make things right, or remember who fed you when you were young. I had to remind myself I wasn't the villain here. I wasn't the liar. I wasn't the one who'd broken the law. I was just the first person in the family to say enough. By the third week, the mortgage company requested a signed affidavit from me along with any supporting documents or communication. Daniel helped me compile everything. Copies of the mortgage paperwork with the forged signature. Emails from my parents admitting to their actions framed as a temporary favor. Texts from Lucas thanking them for getting the house done behind Evelyn's back. A personal statement detailing the years of manipulation and financial expectations I'd endured. When we submitted it all, the bank's fraud team responded with formal acknowledgement and confirmation that their legal department would be taking over. They had serious concerns about the transaction and were reviewing all options, including nullifying the mortgage and pursuing criminal action. I felt a flicker of relief. But it was brief, because 3 days later, Daniel called with the news I had been dreading. They filed. My parents were suing me in Ohio civil court for breach of implied contract, seeking full financial responsibility for the mortgage damages and legal fees. I sat in silence as he explained the next steps, how we would file a motion to dismiss how their case was weak. how he'd seen this tactic before. I heard all of it, but all I could think was they really did it. They really meant it when they said you're part of this whether you like it or not. And now I had no choice but to go to war with the people who had once called me daughter. Courtroom 12B in the Franklin County Courthouse was colder than I expected. Not just the air conditioning, but the energy. Polished wood benches, cream-colored walls, and the heavy hush of anticipation made the space feel like a stage set for a play where everyone already knew the ending but no one wanted to say it aloud. This was my first time in court as anything other than a spectator during jury duty. I wasn't a spectator now. I was the defendant on paper. But in truth, I was the one who'd been wronged. My parents sat on the other side of the room, flanked by their attorney, a polished man named Gregory Holloway. He wore a three-piece suit and the smirk of someone who thought family drama was just another case category. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother, however, did, and when she did, she gave me that tight-lipped smile she used to give when I came home late from school or didn't fold laundry to her exact standard. Disappointment mixed with condescension, still pretending she had the moral high ground. Lucas wasn't present. According to Daniel, my brother didn't want to get dragged into something legal even though it was his home, his benefit, his life that had been the justification for it all. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Honorable Deborah Merritt, took her seat and called the hearing to order. This session was for our motion to dismiss our first chance to try to shut this thing down before it metastasized into something even worse. Daniel stood and opened calmly. Your Honor, this is a case of fabricated obligation, not a valid legal dispute. The plaintiffs, Ms. Carter's parents, filed a mortgage under her name without consent or authorization. They now claim she has a familial duty to honor that debt despite never signing or agreeing to it. That is not only legally unsound, it's absurd. He presented the documents, the forged mortgage, the messages admitting to using my personal information, the timeline of deceit. On the other side, Gregory Holloway launched his rebuttal. Your Honor, this is not a case of fraud. It is a case of miscommunication and broken family trust. Evelyn Carter benefited from a strong upbringing. Her parents provided her with emotional and material support throughout her life. It was clearly understood in this family that when one child succeeded, that child would support the other. I stiffened. Daniel placed a calming hand near my elbow beneath the table, a subtle signal, don't react. Gregory went on. We intend to prove that Evelyn had, through past conversations and behavioral patterns, implicitly agreed to help her brother purchase a home. That she even offered in concept to assist financially. That the paperwork, while irregular, was submitted with the belief she would stand by her commitment. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Holloway, are you telling this court your clients forged their daughter's name on a binding mortgage based on behavioral patterns and presumed understanding? A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. We're not disputing the documents were signed without her physical presence, but that's not a legal gray area, Judge Merritt interrupted. That's forgery. That's fraud. Gregory backpedaled. We simply ask for the opportunity to present the full context before the court. There are always two sides to a family story. My stomach turned. Two sides. As if there were an acceptable version of events where your own parents could use your identity to steal your financial future. Still, the judge didn't rule immediately. She stated she would review the evidence and issue her decision within 10 business days. We left the courthouse, Daniel quiet and composed, me buzzing with unease. Outside, reporters waited. Someone had leaked the case to a local blog that covered unusual lawsuits, and now headlines like "Daughter Sued by Parents Over House She Didn't Buy" were floating around the internet. I didn't speak to the press, but I saw my parents did. My mother stood outside the courthouse steps, handkerchief in hand, saying things like, "We just want to keep the family together, and Evelyn has changed so much we don't even recognize her anymore." The internet picked it up quickly. In the comments, strangers took sides. Some called me ungrateful. Others defended me. The worst part, I kept reading. Late at night alone in my apartment, I scrolled through the debates. Strangers dissecting my family like it was a reality show, picking apart my choices, my personality, my right to say no. But they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know the birthdays I spent alone because Lucas needed support. They didn't know the family vacations I paid for to keep things equal. They didn't know that when I finally bought a home, my mother asked if I felt guilty knowing Lucas was still renting. They didn't know that when I got my first raise at 28, I used it to pay off one of his car loans, quietly, without being asked. Because back then, I still thought that proving my value to my family might earn me something back. I was wrong. 3 days after the hearing, I received an envelope from my mother. No return address. Just my name written in her unmistakable script. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a 2-page letter, handwritten. Evelyn, I don't understand how we got here. You were always such a good girl, so reliable, so smart. I know we haven't seen eye to eye on everything, but suing your own family in public like this. It's humiliating. I hope you realize you've broken your father's heart. We only wanted what was fair. Lucas has had such a hard life. You know that. He needs a chance. A home. Stability. Something you already have 10 times over. Why is it so hard for you to share what you have? If you come to your senses, we're still willing to work this out privately. But if you continue down this path, you're choosing strangers over your own blood. There was no apology, no admission, only guilt manipulation and emotional bait. I folded the letter neatly, put it in a folder labeled Evidence, and filed it away. Daniel called that evening. I saw the press. You holding up, I've been better, I admitted. Want the good news or the bad news? Good. The mortgage company just notified us they've officially removed your name from the deed and mortgage based on the fraud investigation. You're off the hook legally and financially. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. A weight lifted. And the judge hasn't ruled on the dismissal yet, but she's requesting one more hearing. She wants you to testify. I hesitated. Testifying would mean being cross-examined. It would mean standing up in front of my parents again and explaining on record how they had hurt me. But maybe that was exactly what I needed. I'll do it, I said. Let's finish this. The second hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. This time I didn't feel sick on the way to the courthouse. I felt ready, steady. Maybe not confident this wasn't a moment anyone could walk into without emotion, but determined. Daniel and I met in the lobby before heading up to the courtroom. He handed me a warm coffee and gave a short nod. Today isn't about defending yourself, he said. It's about telling the truth. Let that be enough. I nodded. Inside the courtroom looked the same, but something had shifted. My parents sat at their table stiffer than before. My mother clutched that same white handkerchief. My father looked like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. Maybe he had. But I couldn't focus on them. Not today. After some brief procedural remarks, Judge Merritt called me to the stand. I took a deep breath, stood, and walked toward the witness box like I was stepping through a doorway into the rest of my life. I was sworn in. I sat down. Daniel began with gentle, direct questions. Ms. Carter, can you tell the court about the first time you learned your name was being used on the mortgage? I recounted the day I received the documents. The confusion, the panic, the phone call with my mother, the way she'd casually brushed off the legal significance of forging my name. And prior to that, had you ever agreed verbally or in writing to co-sign or assume a mortgage on behalf of your brother? No, I said clearly. Not once. Had you given your parents permission to use your personal financial information to apply for a loan? Never. He paused for a moment, then asked more softly, "Why do you think they assumed they could do it anyway?" I looked at the judge, not my parents. Because for most of my life, saying no wasn't an option, I said. Because I'd been trained through guilt, through manipulation, to believe that having boundaries was selfish, that helping Lucas wasn't a favor, it was an obligation. I could feel the stillness in the room. No one moved. Even the court clerk had stopped typing. I've been paying for Lucas's choices since I was 16, I continued. When his car broke down, I paid. When he dropped out of college, I covered a deposit for a new apartment. I helped him settle debt once quietly. I didn't tell anyone. I just did it because I thought that's what good daughters did, what good sisters did. I paused, swallowing the tightness in my throat. But this was different. This was theft. This was not me being generous. This was them taking something that wasn't offered and punishing me when I refused to pretend it never happened. Daniel nodded. Thank you, Miss Carter. No further questions. Then came cross-examination. Gregory Holloway approached with the smooth confidence of someone who believed he could twist reality into whatever shape he needed. "Ms. Carter," he began, "you've testified that you had no knowledge of the mortgage being filed in your name. But isn't it true you previously provided your parents with access to your financial documents? When I was in college," I said, "over 2 decades ago. So there was a precedent of financial sharing within your family." "Not sharing," I corrected. "They had old paperwork from when I was a student. That's not permission. That's them keeping things they shouldn't have." He moved on. "You've also said that you gave money to your brother over the years. Doesn't that suggest a pattern of family support?" "Yes," I said. "Voluntary support. That's different than forging my name on a legal contract. But it shows a pattern." "A pattern they exploited," I said, cutting in my voice firm. He hesitated. "So your position is that your family had no reason to believe you'd help with this mortgage?" "No," I said. "My position is that even if they believed it, they didn't ask. They assumed. They took. And then they tried to shame me when I refused to stay quiet." He took a breath as if to regroup. "Isn't it true, Ms. Carter, that your parents helped you during difficult times? That they provided shelter, food, and financial support when you were younger?" I leaned forward slightly. "They did what parents are supposed to do. They raised me. And I've never tried to say otherwise. But raising a child doesn't entitle you to commit fraud in her name 30 years later." Judge Merritt glanced at Gregory. "Counselor, I'll remind you again, emotional appeals do not override legal standards." He retreated. I was dismissed from the stand. As I stepped down, I looked briefly toward my parents. My father's eyes were on the floor. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, but there were no tears. Just habit. Daniel and I stepped outside the courtroom 2 hours later. Judge Merritt had called for a recess and promised a final ruling the following week. I sat on a bench in the courthouse hallway, exhausted. Whatever happens, I told Daniel I'm glad I said it. I'm glad it's on the record. "You did more than say it," he replied. "You reclaimed it." That night, I didn't go back to my hotel. I drove 2 hours west to a small lakeside cabin I'd rented quietly for the weekend. No phone calls, no court documents, no news alerts, just me, a stack of books, and a long overdue breath of clean, quiet air. I made tea. I listened to the wind in the trees. I sat on the porch and cried, not because I was weak or broken, but because I was finally strong enough to feel all of it. The grief, the betrayal, the anger. And underneath it all, something new, something almost foreign. Peace. Four days later, the ruling arrived by courier. The judge had dismissed the case in its entirety, with prejudice. She called the plaintiff's actions a clear violation of legal and ethical boundaries and cited a disturbing pattern of entitlement and manipulation. The ruling included a financial sanction covering a portion of my legal fees and a formal referral to the mortgage company for further investigation. The weight lifted, but I didn't cheer. I didn't post online. I didn't call anyone, not even Daniel. Instead, I sat down and wrote a letter I never intended to send Dear Mom and Dad. "You taught me many things, how to be independent, how to be quiet, how to survive. But I had to teach myself how to say no, how to protect my life from the people I once trusted with it, how to break a cycle I didn't create. I still love you, but I love myself more now. Evelyn!" I folded the letter, placed it in a small wooden box on my desk, and closed the lid. Some letters aren't meant to be sent. Some truths are just meant to be said. The first week after the ruling passed quietly, almost suspiciously so. No calls, no letters, no surprise visits from my parents or sudden regretful posts from Lucas. It was like my family had gone radio silent the moment the court acknowledged what I'd known all along, that what they did wasn't just wrong. It was illegal, and I wasn't going to carry it in silence anymore. Daniel called the following Monday. They haven't filed any appeals, he said. Technically, they still could, but given the wording in Judge Merritt's ruling and the sanctions, I doubt they will. "Good," I said. "Let them sit with it." What he didn't say, but we both knew, was that the legal system had done its job, but emotional closure, that was mine to find. and I intended to. I took a week off from work not because I had to, but because I finally recognized I needed it. My boss, Allison, didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Take care of you. We'll be here when you're ready." So I did. I booked a solo trip to Sedona, Arizona. Just me, a rental SUV, and the endless red rocks stretching beneath the high desert sun. I hiked red books under the stars, took slow, deep breaths that didn't feel like armor anymore. One morning, as the sun rose over Cathedral Rock, I sat in stillness and wrote a single sentence in my journal. The war is over, but I'm still holding the sword. I let that sit for a while. And then I began writing what life could look like on my terms without the constant background noise of guilt and obligation. What I wrote surprised me. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It wasn't distance either, not really. It was clarity. I wanted to be in rooms where love didn't have strings attached, where family didn't mean extraction, where being successful wasn't seen as a resource to be mined, but as a life to be respected. It was time to build that for myself. Back in Denver, I reconnected with old friends I'd distanced myself from during the chaos. One of them, Marcy, had known me since college and was one of the few who hadn't questioned my choices throughout the lawsuit. "You seem lighter," she said one night over dinner. "Like you're finally breathing with both lungs." "I am," I said. "It's weird. After all that grief anger, I expected more bitterness." She nodded. "But instead, freedom," I said, "and space to figure out what I want from the people I let into my life." I wasn't just reconnecting, I was rechoosing. I joined a local support group for adults who'd experienced family estrangement. It wasn't therapy, it was more like emotional CPR with strangers who understood, without long explanations. At first, I just listened, but by the third session I spoke. I used to think family was about loyalty no matter what I said, but now I think it's about mutual respect. If one person's love demands your silence or sacrifice, it's not love, it's control. Heads nodded. No one told me to forgive faster. No one implied I should be thankful they raised me. They just heard me. And that I realized was more healing than anything else. 2 months later, something unexpected happened. I received an email from Lucas. No subject line, just a brief message. I moved out, staying with friends now. I'm trying to figure some things out. I don't expect a response. Just wanted to say I know I messed up. I'm sorry. No excuses, no justifications, not even a request for forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply, not immediately. But I saved it, because sometimes progress starts with a sentence. I channeled the quiet into something productive. I launched a small online project, a blog called Boundaries and Balance. I shared stories mine and anonymous contributions from others navigating complex family dynamics. Not to vent, but to validate. To put words to experiences many carried silently for years. Within weeks, readers were commenting, "Thank you. I thought I was the only one. Your story gave me the courage to say no to my brother's manipulation. I wish my younger self had read this. The blog gave me a sense of purpose, but more than that, it gave me community. These weren't just stories. They were warnings, roadmaps, permission slips. We were building something together, and I was finally living from a place of truth." I never heard from my parents again, not directly. An aunt mentioned in passing that they'd sold their house and downsized. Another cousin said my mother had told people I'd turned my back on the family for money. I let them say what they needed to say. I didn't need the last word, because the truth wasn't in what was spoken, it was in what was lived. My life as it stood now was full, balanced, mine. I had a job I loved, a circle of friends who respected boundaries, a therapist who didn't try to force reconciliation like a trophy, and most importantly, I had me, intact, unbroken, no longer bending myself in half for people who wouldn't meet me where I stood. One evening, as I was closing my laptop after a long day of writing and answering messages from readers, I looked out over the Denver skyline and whispered something aloud I never thought I'd say thank you. Not to my parents, not to the court, but to myself, for surviving, for speaking, for walking away without losing who I was. 1 year after the ruling, I stood in my kitchen preparing lemon tea while the early spring sun poured through the windows. There was a calmness in the air that used to feel unfamiliar. These days, it felt like home. The mug in my hand had a simple message etched in cursive: I am not responsible for other people's comfort. A small gift from my friend Marcy. At the time, I had laughed, but now I read it each morning like scripture. A daily reminder that boundaries weren't walls, they were front doors with locks. And I had finally learned how to use the key. That afternoon, I logged into the blog I'd started months ago, Boundaries and Balance, to write a new post. This time, it wasn't a response to chaos, it wasn't processing trauma. It was celebration. The post was titled, 1 year Later, What I Learned After Saying No. I wrote honestly about what had changed, about how the silence from my parents hadn't felt like punishment, but permission to breathe. About how Lucas had emailed me again once short, polite and sober, saying he'd found steady work and was seeing a counselor. I hadn't replied not out of anger, but intention. Some things need time and proof, not just words. I wrote about the people who had stepped in not out of obligation, but compassion. My boss, who never once made me feel like my lawsuit made me a liability. My friend Jessica, the paralegal, who had helped me when I was too stunned to think straight. My therapist, who never once pushed me to reconcile, only to recognize. I ended the post with this: sometimes peace doesn't look like everyone hugging at Thanksgiving. Sometimes it looks like an apartment with quiet mornings, strong locks, and a heart that no longer trembles when the phone rings. It looks like knowing you did the hard thing and that you didn't lose yourself doing it. After posting, I stepped out onto my balcony, the Denver skyline painted gold in the evening light. I thought about the version of me who had once believed that love meant sacrifice, that family meant silence, that success must be repaid like a debt. She was gone, not buried, transformed. I still missed her sometimes, her optimism, her longing, her innocence. But I didn't want her back. The woman who stood in her place had survived not just betrayal, but self-erasure, and she'd rewritten every chapter since. Later that night, as I was tidying up, I opened the small wooden box on my bookshelf, the one holding the letter I had written but never sent. Dear Mom and Dad. I didn't need to read it again. I knew what it said, knew the ache that had gone into it, the need for understanding, for closure, for something human in return. But I also knew it would never be mailed. Instead, I lit a candle and gently fed the pages into a ceramic bowl, watching them curl and blacken, the words turning to ash. Not out of rage, but release. Some letters are only meant to be written. Some griefs are only meant to be honored quietly, not solved. When the fire cooled, I poured the ash into a small mason jar, labeled it with a single word, closure, and placed it in the back of my desk drawer. Not forgotten, just no longer needed in the front of my life. In the months that followed, my life expanded. I mentored 2 women in their 30s dealing with similar financial coercion from family. I spoke at a local nonprofit's workshop on navigating financial abuse. I began planning a trip to Scotland, a dream I had shelved for years, in the name of being responsible. I had never felt more free, and still not alone, because now I understood that family isn't who raised you, it's who respects you. It's who hears no and doesn't demand why. I had built that, chosen it, protected it. And standing here now, tea in hand, sun on my face, I knew this truth down to my bones. I didn't break my family. I broke a pattern, and that was something worth everything it cost me. 16 months after the lawsuit, I stood in front of a group of young professionals at a financial literacy seminar in Boulder, Colorado. Most of them were in their 20s, bright-eyed, ambitious, already carrying the weight of student loans, early careers, and in more than a few cases, family obligations they didn't know how to question. The topic that night was recognizing financial abuse within families. It wasn't just theory for me. I spoke plainly but carefully. "I'm not here to tell you to cut off your families," I said. "I'm here to remind you that love does not excuse manipulation, and support should never require you to erase yourself." There were tears in some eyes. Nods. One woman mouthed "thank you" halfway through. Afterward, during Q&A, a young man with a hesitant voice asked, "But what if it's your mom and she says, 'If you don't help her, she'll be on the street'?" I didn't flinch. "You are not responsible for your parents' choices," I said gently. "It's not unloving to say no. It's self-preserving. It's healthy. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it's the beginning of a boundary that gives everyone a chance to grow." They applauded, but more than that, they listened. And in that moment, I understood something that had been forming inside me for a while. My story wasn't just a cautionary tale, it was a path, a map for others trying to find their way out of inherited chaos. Few weeks later, I submitted paperwork to formalize the Carter Foundation for Financial Boundaries, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting adults facing financial manipulation and coercion within families. Our mission was simple education advocacy and legal support for those who felt trapped between guilt and survival. I funded the foundation with part of my investment portfolio money that had once been earmarked for family vacations and holiday gifts I no longer felt obligated to provide. Now it had a new purpose. Within 6 months, we had helped 5 clients challenge fraudulent debts, educated over 300 people through webinars and workshops, and built a library of resources for recognizing coercive family dynamics. One of our first scholarship recipients, Maya, had grown up in a similar situation. Her parents had ruined her credit before she turned 20. When we met, she was working 2 jobs and sleeping in her car between shifts. Today, she has stable housing, a clear credit report, and a part-time role at the foundation, helping others navigate the very systems that nearly broke her. "You saved my life," she said one afternoon. I shook my head. "No," I told her. "You saved your life. I just made sure the door was unlocked." The foundation gave me purpose, but it also gave me back a piece of myself I hadn't realized. I'd lost the part that believed I could build something lasting, not just for me, but for others. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need reconciliation. What I needed was to leave a legacy that didn't mirror the dysfunction I'd inherited. To create a family of choice built on respect, mutuality, and the radical belief that survival isn't enough. We deserve more than endurance. We deserve peace. One day in late fall, I received a letter from my grandmother, Ruth. Her handwriting, shaky but unmistakable, filled the page with warmth. "Your mother still doesn't understand what happened, but I do. And I want you to know I'm proud of you. I may not have said it when you were young. I didn't know how, but I see what you've built. Not just your career or your case, but your courage. That kind of strength runs in this family too, even if it skipped a generation." I read it twice, then 3 times. Then folded it neatly and placed it in my keepsake box next to the ashes of that first letter I never mailed. One was a goodbye. This one, it was a beginning. The following spring, on a crisp, clear morning in Denver, I hosted the first in-person retreat for boundaries and balance. 15 women, 10 men, 3 non-binary attendees, all strangers, all survivors, all ready to step into something new. We gathered in a circle at the opening session, surrounded by mountain views, and I asked them the same question I had once asked myself: who are you when no one else gets to rewrite your story? There was silence at first. Then a single voice said, "Someone worth protecting," then another, "Someone finally at peace." And finally, a woman with gray-streaked hair whispered, "Someone I've only just met, but who I think I might love." We cried, we laughed, we held space. And as I looked around the room, I realized that healing isn't always about returning to what was. Sometimes it's about stepping into what can be with clarity, compassion, and unapologetic boundaries. And this is the legacy I chose. Not a home passed down, not a title earned, but a voice reclaimed. A future designed with both hands and the quiet confidence of someone who survived not just others' expectations, but her own silence. If you're reading this wondering whether you're allowed to say enough, let this be your permission slip. You already are.